It's Friday, the 8th of March, 2024.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Podnews Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
Yes, I'm James Cridland, the editor of Podnews.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of TrueFans.
In the chapters today, Apple backtracks its EU decision and sees sense. Apple fined €2 billion and sees red. Apple launches transcripts and sees words. YouTube fires 50 staff. And Spotify deletes someone's show, all their followers, and all their money. Plus,
I'm Gretta Cohn, the CEO of Pushkin Industries, and coming up on Pod News today, I'll be talking about a new season of revisionist history and so much more.
And I'm Alban Brooke, head of marketing at Buzzsprout, and later I'll be talking about Buzzsprout for iOS.
They will. This podcast is sponsored by Buzzsprout, podcast hosting made easy, with easy and powerful tools, free learning materials, remarkable customer support, and a new iOS app.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
So where should we start this week, James? Hey, let's start with my mates, Apple. They're back on the Christmas list for a little bit. They launched iOS 17.4. You and I have been testing it in beta, but you've said you wouldn't talk about it until it was released. So it's released, James, with transcripts. Come on, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think it's pretty good. In fact, one thing that I noticed when I was getting ready to talk to Alban is I had a quick look through the transcripts for this very show, and what I have noticed in the transcripts for this show is not only does it have our names correct in there, so it's got proper voice recognition. We're producing our own transcripts and sending it to them. They're also merging the chapters in with the transcripts as well, which is something that they never talked about when they gave me the press briefing for. But it makes it really cool because you can actually read through the transcript, but actually see where all of the chapter points are as well. So, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, which is smart.
I think we've had conversations in the past where I've gone, why have you got show notes, chapters and transcripts? Because if you looked at a Word document, then fundamentally all of that's merged into one document. So I quite like the idea of having chapter markers at the top of transcript elements so that you know that you're moving on to the next chapter. That's really nice.
There have been a few people in some of the groups that I've been in saying, typical Apple doing its own thing. But actually, it's kind of not really, because Apple is taking an open standard, the podcast transcript standard, part of podcasting 2.org, and it's taking that and pulling in transcripts where they exist, and if they don't exist, then obviously it's making its own. But I think that it's a pretty good thing. I have had checkered success with the Pod News Daily, which is the podcast, of course, that I completely self-host. I'm not relying on Buzzsprout to do that, and that's been interesting, trying to get transcripts to kind of work the way that I would like them to work. I'm still playing around with that, but it does seem that although Apple talks about wanting VTT files, it does seem that it works absolutely fine with SRT files. And if you look at what Buzzsprout are giving them, Buzzsprout are only giving them SRT files, and it's working absolutely fine. So I don't know, a little bit more playing around with that. But yeah, I think it's all pretty good, really.
Yeah, I think, look, I can poke the bear occasionally over at Apple Towers, but reality is they are a massive company with great resources. The way that they've actually done the word-by-word transcription is actually very accurate. I look at how we do it at TrueFans, and we are, I'd say, 99% accurate in terms of where the words are being highlighted, but sometimes that doesn't actually highlight the right word, and then it has to play catch-up, and then it's right, or it'll be behind it. I think with Apple, I noticed when I was just pushing it a little bit and prodding it, it actually was very good at jumping to the exact word and starting there. So again, hats off to Apple. Where they do good things, I will praise them, and when they do bad things, I will certainly tell them.
Why? Have they done something bad?
Well, they haven't done something bad, but they've lost $2 billion. The EU's just fined them $2 billion because they're not very happy with what Apple did in terms of the Apple Store and the way that they implemented the DMA rules. So yes, so they went, you know what? We'll give you a $2 billion fine. That's a starter. Are you going to play the ball? We'll see what happens next.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And it's something particularly that Daniel Ek was very much behind. Spotify have made a lot of complaints against Apple for various things. He released a statement once the EU had worked out that they were going to fine the company $2 billion. This is why he has been making all of the complaints that he's been making.
The internet is at risk, and fundamentally and principally, we at Spotify believe an open internet is a much better internet. And so that's why we're fighting, because Apple has decided that they want to close down the internet and make it theirs. And they view every single person using an iPhone to be their user, and that they should be able to dictate what that user experience should be, rather than that the iOS platform is a platform that accesses the internet, and that openness is good.
So this is Daniel Ek, of course, the man who tried to take Spotify as being the only place where you could get podcasts. Openness is bad in that case. Spotify, of course, don't support any of the Open Podcasting 2.0 tags. They do their own things in terms of transcripts. They do their own things in terms of chapters. They do their own things in terms of lots of sense. But obviously, open internet is very important when you're talking about Spotify versus Apple. I think it's all a little bit dubious, to be honest.
Yes, yeah. As I said to Neil Veglio, if you squint hard enough, everyone's right, everyone's correct. I mean, yes, he does want an open internet where basically Apple can't charge 30% on the payments. And to be fair, I wonder why. But to be fair, I mean, I was listening to Scott Galloway on Pivot, and he was saying, look, Apple don't charge Apple Music 30% on their payments. So you've got Apple both being the infrastructure provider of payments, but also favouring their own apps. And that's the problem. That's where Apple falls down. I mean, Google fell down when it was favouring itself in search results. And again, Microsoft fell down in the past when it favoured its own browser over everyone else. And I think I've gone on and said Apple needs to either be much more open in third-party support, or it needs to be broken up and have its apps removed. You can't have your cake and eat it, and that's what Apple does.
Yeah, I was quite interested in reading, there's a bit of tittle-tattle today saying that if you download an app through an app store which isn't Apple's app store in the EU, which you'll be able to do from here on in, then that's absolutely fine. But if you then go and, spend more than 90 days somewhere else outside of the EU, then Apple will stop that app from working. Which is just like genius. Yeah, Apple will basically go, it doesn't look as if you live in the EU anymore, and I think you shouldn't have that app on your phone anymore, and so they're going to get rid of it, which is brilliant. And I think Daniel Ek went on and said that they were a little bit skeptical that Apple were actually going to play ball with all of this.
Apple has a history of skirting these rules. It's done so in many territories around the world: Japan, South Korea, Netherlands, just to name a few, where Apple's lost similar cases and it basically decided to ignore it or just vaguely comply, but not really comply with the spirit of whatever the court decided needed to happen. And they keep on doing that. And so the cynic in me would say that I think Apple might behave in the way that it behaved in the past, which is it's just going to ignore it. It's going to keep on acting the way it has been acting.
Yeah, and I think he might have a point there.
I think he does. I mean, we've just talked about Apple's support for transcripts, and you and I have talked about the Sirius XM case. Apple conveniently are bringing out transcripts around the same time as its legal judgment and throwing a bone to the podcasting 2.0 community. And I think it is throwing a bone. I don't think it's, they could have done this a year ago. They didn't. And I think they will only do it when they're pushed into a corner and forced to do it. And that's sad.
From Apple's point of view, they are basically saying Spotify's been downloaded more than 119 billion times on Apple devices. Their engineers, Apple's engineers, have actually flown to Stockholm to help Spotify's coders put new features into the Spotify app, and they've not charged Spotify for any of this. Spotify pays Apple absolutely nothing. for anything, and they managed to get a decent spot on the App Store, and they managed to benefit from all of Apple's work. So you can see it on that side as well. But I'm only really playing devil's advocate because I feel that I kind of ought to.
Well, Marguerite Vestager, the Executive Vice President in charge of competition policy, said for a decade Apple abused its dominant position in the market for distribution of music streaming apps through the App Store. And I think that's the problem. Apple is trying to be a good egg on one hand, supporting Spotify, but on the other hand, this 30% is just extortionate. And I think maybe if Apple bring that down to a much more reasonable charge for the services they provide, people wouldn't complain. I think it's now everyone's beginning to say, hang on a minute, Apple, you've milked the cow long enough. Time to actually now let other people have a little bit of the pie.
Yeah, and it's not just 30%, is it? Because it does go down once you're large enough, I thought.
Yeah, it goes down to 15% if you get significant traction and various other things. But again, 90% of apps within the App Store aren't going to hit that marker. So, you're always going to end up paying the 30%. And again, there's no way you can use alternative payment systems, so you're beholden. And again, later on in the show, I'll be talking about how we are going to implement Apple Pay within True Fans and how it can be done outside the App Store. But again, I still have to pay the 30% tax, irrelevant, because if you can't beat them, sadly, you have to join them in some ways.
Hold on to your trousers, everybody. It's another Sam Sethi rant on the way. You should be happy about Apple because they've reversed their decision to remove PWA web apps in the EU. You'll be able to use progressive web apps in the EU now. True Fans is a progressive web app, and you'll be able to add that app to the home screen just the way that you can add a variety of different things. I mean, that's good news, isn't it?
It's amazing news because, on the one hand, they were taking it away from us and I was going to have an absolute fit. And on the other hand, they've just sort of handed it back. So status quo restored. But, look, why they did that, I have no idea. Why they threatened it, I have no idea. Why they put it back as a feature. Suddenly, Safari's suddenly safe again. Amazing. How was it unsafe and we had to remove it? And without doing anything, because I've not had an upgrade, it's suddenly safe again. So God knows what that one's about. But what I would say is, look, we as the community talk about open standards. Daniel talked about open standards a minute ago, and the open internet. And we talk about podcasting being open. And then the first thing everyone does is they go and build native iOS apps and Android apps. I have built a PWA. I'm not hypocritical. I stick to the open web standards. I do not go and build proprietary platform standards. I fought Microsoft when I was at Netscape to stop them using ActiveX and JScript, proprietary Microsoft tech that would have killed the web. And yet here we are, fast forward 20 years, and we still are kowtowing down to Apple's proprietary standards. That's not open. It's not a W3 standard. I don't know why app developers aren't sticking to open standards. We're all going on about how wonderful RSS is being open, and yet on the same breath, we go, oh, now download my iOS app. It's totally proprietary, but don't worry about it. I'm like, okay, can you hear yourself? And then we hear everyone going, Mastodon's the future, Mastodon's the future. ActivityPub, it's amazing, it's amazing. The federated web. But hey, remember to go and get my Android app because that's not proprietary. So all I'd say is, why don't we build PWAs? Why don't we stick to the open web? It's a W3C standard and stop building to closed proprietary platforms. But no, everyone's going to be hypocritical from Daniel Ek down, and they will pretend to be open when they're not really open.
Coming up later on the Podnews Weekly Review, we talk to our sponsor Buzzsprout about their new iOS app.
Is that our ex-sponsor?
But let's talk about Spotify first, shall we?
Yes, what's going on with Spotify? Oh yes, a little bit more about them. Spotify for Podcasters has increased its lead to 31.2% of new episodes. Now, we have, over the years since they launched this free version, poo-pooed Spotify for free. And they've had Joe Rogan, they've had Diary of a CEO, and clearly they've got a lot of people. It clearly is a good strategy for Spotify. And I know a lot of other hosts offer free, but they don't seem to attract the same upscale that Spotify does. Why?
I wonder whether or not the why is that Megaphone couldn't get video working until very recently. Joe Rogan has switched from Spotify for Podcasters to Megaphone. Similarly, Diary of a CEO, which also does video, is now on Megaphone as well. I wonder whether it's just purely that Megaphone, who, by the way, have said to various people that they have no intention of supporting the transcript tag at all. It's not even on the job list yet. So I wonder whether or not Megaphone have basically gone, it just takes us time to do these complicated things. And that's why we've seen Joe Rogan and Diary of a CEO, because they wanted video on Spotify, using Spotify for Podcasters. But it's now powering 31.2% of new episodes, which is interesting. Spotify for Podcasters uses Amazon CloudFront under the hood, and Amazon CloudFront has hit a new record that now serves 55% of all new episodes. So if Amazon CloudFront goes belly up and falls over, then half of all of the podcasts on the internet will fall over, including the Podnews Daily, but not including this, because Buzzsprout, our sponsor, don't use Amazon CloudFront, interestingly. So, I don't know. I think that's probably one of the reasons why Spotify for Podcasters, has been attracting a lot of people, because it's been the only way, Spotify Open, has been the only way of getting video into the Spotify platform.
Well, they've done something else, though, in this week, James, that isn't very cool. What have they done?
Yes, this is a story that we covered yesterday in Podnews, and it's a story about a podcast called Evolving Prisons. Now, that had some pretty good figures. The figures were growing. The show, Kagan Carey, who produces the show, had even used Spotify's paid subscription model, which I didn't really think was a thing, but no, it turns out it is. And she was earning money from that. People were paying, I think, £1.50 per month for bonus episodes, $1.99. Anyway, and then she heard that she'd gained a nomination for Outstanding Indie Podcast at the True Crime Awards. So everything was going absolutely fine until Spotify deleted her podcast.
Oops.
Not just did Spotify delete their podcast, Spotify gave all of the money back to these paid subscribers. Spotify pulled the podcast off Apple and various other places as well. And so basically she has to start all over again. And she contacted me and she said, you've covered stories about Anchor deleting people's shows in the past. Is this something that you might be able to help with? And thankfully, I did know somebody who can help. And while Spotify don't comment on specific incidents, they say we are working closely with the creator to quickly resolve this issue. My understanding is that they've at least been able to restore the stats for the show. They've emailed the former subscribers asking them to resubscribe, and they've reimbursed some of the lost revenue as well. It's a good step, but obviously what Spotify can't do is they can't get all of her subscribers back on all of the other platforms as well. So it's a bit of a mess. And the reason why it was deleted and then put back, it was deleted because the algorithm flagged it because of suspicious payments activity, apparently. And within 12 hours, she got another email saying, after review, your podcast account has been reinstated. However, based on our internal flags, we recommend updating your password. Which looks to me as if that's another one of the many Spotify password hacks which have been happening over the last couple of years. So, just goes to show, I think. I mean, I said this in the article yesterday. I said, perhaps if your podcasting has become a little more serious, it's worth paying for podcast hosting with a smaller company for the personal touch you get even when things go wrong. And I'm sure that Kagan will be finding somewhere else. But that's a dodgy old thing, isn't it?
And if you think this is the only one, this is the one that you're aware of, I'm sure there are many others that haven't come to light, because I can't believe this is the one and only ever incident. Yeah,
and to be fair, Spotify have done much of what they can. Apart from deleting the thing in the first place. And to be fair, we will always hear more about this going on Spotify than anywhere else, because Spotify is both the largest company but also gives podcasts away for free. So of course we're going to hear that. But even so, that's not a good look, is it?
No. Now, moving on to friends of the show, or after my rant, maybe not, but Buzzsprout has a new iOS app, and I have downloaded it and I have played with it, and it is very lovely. But James, you caught up with Alban Brooke, the marketing director at Buzzsprout, didn't you?
I did catch up with Alban, and had a good chat with him. And the first question, as I always do, even though I think that everybody knows, is I asked, what is Buzzsprout?
Buzzsprout is a technical solution that hosts this podcast. So we help get your podcast online and distributed out to the world. We're proud supporters of the Podnews Weekly Review, and we host 120,000 other active podcasts, but those are incidental to the work we do here.
Indeed. So Buzzsprout has launched a new iOS app this week to much critical acclaim. Why have you done that then?
Well, for years, using apps ourselves, you see lots of use cases, things that we would really like to have a mobile app. And over the years, we kind of added up more, and we take screenshots and say, oh, this is a useful thing. And I think we got to 4 real reasons that we wanted to have a mobile app. And that's when we started working on it. So those 4 are real-time notifications, simplified podcast management, statistics, and sharing. And we can go more into each of those if you'd like. But the whole point is, we have this device with us all day, every day. Indie podcasters are often at a work computer or somewhere other than their home. And it's nice to be able to take these quick interactions with your podcast, no matter where you are.
Yes, and one of the things that it offers, notifications. What sort of notifications can we expect from the Buzzsprout iOS app?
Well, this is an area that phones really excel, especially if it's done well, if the app doesn't abuse it. But it's a real-time notification. It's mostly very small amount of text, and it prompts you to take an action right when something's ready. So for us, that means your episode's done processing, or co-host AI has some suggestions for you. We have your weekly statistics. Maybe you have an ad opportunity with Buzzsprout ads. And those are all things we are sending emails, but with email, it may not be a few hours till you see it. With a notification on your phone, you can take action right away.
Yeah, and that's useful for things like when co-host has finished processing the podcast that you've just uploaded, those sorts of things.
Exactly. So instead of you having to, check in on your email or check in on Buzzsprout to see if something's ready, now you're getting a notification. You go, okay, great. I like that title. Let's publish it. And you can move on. And
then you can correct typos and things like that just from your phone, I guess.
So this is one of the things we talk about as simplified podcast management. And then what it really turns into, a lot of people are going, oh, it's the typos.
Yes.
But the way I think about it is sometimes we're trying to balance quality. We want a lot of podcasters to aspire to a high level of quality, but without giving into perfectionism. And perfectionism to me can be really bad when you're double and triple checking, you're re-listening to the episode to make sure you never made a mistake. But what we can do, or at least where Buzzsprout can step in, is help you course correct. Maybe you made a typo. Maybe you forgot a link. Well, your listeners are going to tell you that pretty quickly. And as soon as you hear that from one person, as long as you can make that change very quickly, you can still balance quality without giving into this, overly anxious management of your podcast. So update typos, update a link, publish an episode, make a quick change. It's just an easy way to manage your podcast, and you're always logged into your shows.
Yeah, it's very cool. And you can, of course, do all of that while, in Dave Jones's words, while you are doing a warm server migration. If you've heard the latest podcast, you'll know exactly what he's talking about there. And if you've not, probably best.
I'll have to go listen to this to catch what Dave Jones is talking about.
Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like.
Great.
One of the other things that you can do with it is that you can have a look at your paid subscriptions, because, of course, Buzzsprout offers that as well. So you can see the people who are supporting you. You can manage dynamic content, I notice. You can even manage the Buzzsprout ads. So you can take a peek at who wants to advertise on your podcast, and you can say, hell no, or yes, that's great.
Hopefully you're saying hell yes. That's our goal.
Yes, of course. Of course, yes. Absolutely. Apart from that one podcast. So it's a really useful thing. One of the things that, of course, a mobile phone is perfect for is sharing information over to social media, which, of course, many people use mobile phones for, and other things as well. There's so much which is shareable from the app as well, isn't there?
So this is something I kept seeing on Instagram. Instead of sharing our achievements that we would send to someone in an email, people would just share screenshots. And I never was understanding it. And then I went, oh, it's because they're logging in on their phone. They're on a browser. They take a screenshot, and it's so easy to go from screenshot over into the app. But it always hurt a little bit because we did so much work to try to make them a bit prettier than a screenshot. And yet the screenshots were winning. And so this is an opportunity for us to make it easy to share episodes or podcasts or the tweets we write you with co-host, visual sound bites, the achievements, or if you want, you can now make prettier screenshots of your stats. But all of those are really easy because we're all used to doing that from apps and then sharing things over to social. It's a much more natural way, I think, of sharing and interacting with your audience.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. So who built it? Did you use an external company and spend oodles of money in getting it built?
No, I think anytime you try to pay somebody else to build something for you, it doesn't turn out to be the best quality product. So we hired for this. We hired a wonderful developer by the name of Dylan Ginsberg. He built the iOS app for Basecamp. If you ever heard of Basecamp, he was at 37 Signals before this, and he's joined the Buzzsprout team. And it's really wonderful to have his expertise because he combines Ruby on Rails knowledge, which we all have. That's what we build Buzzsprout in, with how to bring all of the work we're doing there into an app, make it easy, make it seamless. Probably the reason, this, I guess, illustrates why it's important for us, at least, to build it in-house. The day we launched, somebody sent me a message and said, oh, I tried to reset my password on my phone. And when I did, I got some weird page inside the app. And as soon as I saw that, I sent it to Dylan. And I think 30 minutes later, it's fixed and we've corrected it because we hadn't caught it before. But if we'd been using somebody outside, I think that's one of those things that can turn into a 2-week process. And, it's painful for tons of people. I hate telling people, oh, the workaround is don't use the app. So now the workaround is we can just fix these problems very quickly.
Cool.
And it's great to have the team in-house.
That's really good. Obviously, iPhone is popular in the US, maybe not quite so popular in many other countries. Is there an Android version coming?
There is an Android version on the way. The way these things work, you have to pick one to start with. And so we started with iPhone because that's where more of our customers are. But we have a list of everybody who's on Android and says they're ready for the app. It's growing rapidly. Yeah. And we're very excited to bring it to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's looking very, very smart. It's for free. All you need is a Buzzsprout login, and you'll find it in the Apple App Store for now. Apple's also launched transcripts this week. I don't know if you've spotted this.
I have. I tweeted about it.
Yeah.
2.5 years ago, was when we started all of our work with transcripts. I think, or maybe it's 3.5 now. It's 2020. The years go by quickly. I was looking back at it, and when we started talking about transcripts, I remember Kevin saying to me, wouldn't it be great if transcripts looked like Apple Music lyric mode? And now I'm looking at transcripts in Apple Podcasts, and I'm like, this looks like Apple Music lyric mode.
It genuinely does.
It's really great.
Yeah, it's got all of the same things, the little dots while it's waiting for the instrumental to finish or whatever. It's using the same typeface. It's a very, very smart thing. And in fact, you and I, just before we came on, we were talking about actually, how nice they look, and the fact that it's pulling in chapter titles into the transcript as well, so that the transcript doesn't just look like a great big block of text. Does Buzzsprout support the Apple transcripts?
Buzzsprout does. We create these transcripts for you. We can either pull them in from Descript if you use Descript, or we can transcribe them for you. And it looks like everything is working well. So we send them over to Apple Podcasts, and they're showing up in people's phones now. There's you were the first one to tell me about the chapter markers, that you were seeing it for this show. And so it's really exciting to hear that Buzzsprout also supports the chapter markers inside of iOS 17.4 transcripts. That's news to me, and I'm very excited to hear it.
Yeah, no, it's looking really good. I'm always slightly worried about saying, have a look in the Apple Podcasts app right now, because typically this week will be the week that I've messed it all up and it doesn't work properly. But it works super well with the transcripts that you get from Co-host. Try and remember, I will try and remember this week to change the names of the voices, so that it doesn't just say voice number 1 and voice number 2, which I think it says last week.
Voice number 2 is my favorite podcast host.
Yeah, well, voice number 2 is always Sheila D, who does our little jingles. So yeah, she does a fantastic job. But it seems to work really, really nicely. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of that. And you're star on your own weekly podcast all about the podcast industry, aren't you?
Buzzcast. We are still doing Buzzcast. I still love it. I enjoy it every other week with Kevin and Jordan. And it's always a pleasure to find out when the people we respect and people we like are listening to the show. So we've one thing we've been experimenting lately with is this idea of having people text into the show. And it's been really fun to get more and more engagement on the podcast, and we've been trying to incorporate that more. So if anybody listening to this is a Buzzcast listener, text the show and let us know what you think. We'd love to read your comments on the air.
Yeah, and of course I'm listening to that and I'm going, oh, it's a blizzard of numbers, and also I'm in Australia, and I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if I can even text that particular number. I should probably give it a go.
I need to add like a +1 to the beginning of it. That's a good point. I need to look into how that works for international numbers.
And +1 if you're outside of the United States. Because it's interesting, because I think we've seen obviously boosts and things like that as being a really nice way of getting feedback from the people who listen. But there's a certain amount of people that will send a boost. There is, of course, the holy grail of cross-app comments, which is a lovely thing. Somebody left a message for this very podcast on Spotify, because apparently you can leave messages on Spotify, but nobody has ever done that in the last 3 years. But somebody has ended up doing that as well. It would be lovely, wouldn't it, if there's a way of pulling in all of those comments and making them appear in an app, and I would love that to happen at some point, but it seems to be even beyond Adam and Dave's brain power to have actually achieved that.
Well, maybe the Mastodon and Fediverse and all of that stuff will come together one day, and we will get cross-app comments. It'd be wonderful to help more things become like podcasting, become like email, become like the web, that's open and free, and everybody can interact with who they want to and not be beholden to the big tech giants.
Yes, that would be a splendid thing. Well, Alban, thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for the support that you give us. It's very, very much appreciated. So thank you for that, and of course, thank you to Buzzsprout, where can people go, as if they don't know, to find out more about what you guys do?
Well, you can go to buzzsprout.com, but you can also now go to the Apple App Store and you can download the Buzzsprout app if you have a Buzzsprout account. And you can always reach out to me on Twitter at Alban Brooke. I'd love to chat. And it's always great to hear from people who listen to this show.
Very nicely done. Alban, thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
Alban Brooke there, the wonderful marketing director over at Buzzsprout, hoping to see him over in LA for a beer.
Yes, you're not going to, because he's not coming.
Oh, Alban.
He fancies the humidity of the Florida life instead, I'm afraid. But we will see him in Washington, D.C. if we're going there. I will be, certainly, so at least he'll be there.
Okay. Is he coming to London? Do we know?
Don't know, actually. God. Don't know. I didn't bother asking. I should have asked.
Got to increase that travel budget, Alban.
Yeah.
Now, yes, lovely app. It works very well. I've played with it and tried it. Very slick. They've got an Android app coming soon. Both are free. My one question to Alban would be, and probably to Kevin and Tom, is why did you build a native iOS app when you could have built a PWA? Because I looked at the features that you've used and there's nothing that you are using that is native to the phone itself, like the camera or maybe something else like that. So you now have the problem of having to maintain 3 code bases, the Android app, the iOS app, and also the web app. So that would be my only one question to them. Why did you build a native app rather than build a PWA? Yeah,
and I didn't ask that question, but as we heard, it is built in-house, which is a good thing because bad things happen when you subcontract that sort of thing out. Just playing devil's advocate on PWAs. On an Android phone, when you use a website for a couple of times that has a PWA in it, it will come up and say, would you like to install this as an app? And you press the button and it installs it as an app. Does that happen on iOS as well?
No, and that's one of the downfalls of it. You have to prompt the user, so we do, as to how to install it as an app. What you can do, and I think this is where, again, Apple are just being pedantic because they could make this work. When you go to buzzsprout.com in the web page, it will now prompt you with a banner at the top saying, hey, we've got an iOS app. Would you like to install it? Which is a lovely way of doing that. And of course, the user goes click, bang, and it installs from the App Store.
Yeah. Works on podcasts as well, by the way. Yeah.
Yes, and so that's a lovely way of doing it. And Apple could make that an open feature for anyone to use. They choose not to. They purposely want to hinder PWAs as much as they can. So, yes, that is one advantage of building native apps. You do actually get access to some of the features that Apple disable for everyone else.
Yeah, it's a real shame that, isn't it? Because actually, it's just one button, and Android makes it easy and simple and straightforward to do. And it's a shame that Apple, it's pretty well hidden under the weird non-standard share icon that they use with the arrow pointing out of a box. It's an arrow pointing out of a box. So yes, it's a bit of a shame, and it just says add to home screen, so it's not that obvious what's actually going on there either, but still, there you go.
Yeah, no, what was interesting though this week, James, is I found a really interesting website called what PWA can do .today. It's a really good site if you look at it.
Yes.
Yes, easy to say. What you can see is what features currently are available for PWAs that are native iOS apps and what features aren't. And surprisingly, you can use Apple Pay with a PWA. I just didn't know this. So I don't have to build a native iOS app to have use of
very
the
nice.
Apple Pay.
Yeah.
And this is a hat tip to Oscar from last week's podcast Index. He talked about an app called Primal App, which is a Noster app. And what they've done is they've worked out cleverly, well done to them, that you can use in-app purchases within your app. So what they do is they say, for $4.99, you can get so many sats. Click the button, Apple Pay pays it, and it's instant. There's no KYC, know your customer, set your bank account up, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I think this is the way forward. And so we're looking at implementing exactly the same feature with different values. So, buy this in-app purchase for $4.99 or $8.99 or $12.99. I don't know the numbers we're going to use yet, or custom.
Yeah.
And this is a great way that you can actually get fiat to sat with one click using Apple Pay. But because Apple support it within the web rather than having to have a native iOS app, I can actually build that in, and we'll have that available in the next couple of weeks.
And you can also buy classified advertising on the Podnews website using Apple Pay and Google Pay. So there's a thing. Hurrah. Interesting stuff. If only they made it easier for normal people to work out how to install these things. I think that would be a good thing. But still, there we go.
That's not happening. Now, moving on, you use a Shure mic, don't you?
I do sometimes, yes. I was using an Ethos microphone from Earthworks Audio for the last couple of weeks, which is beautiful. But yes, I'm back on the Shure mic right now because something went wrong and I couldn't fix it the other day. And I thought, I know what works. Yes, but why do you ask?
Well, Shure's unveiled a mic called, it's the world's smallest and best sounding wireless lavalier system. Now, you've got a small Shure mic as well, haven't you?
Yeah, but this is this is one of those ones that you would clip onto your shirt. It's a little clip-on microphone that is, wireless, works fantastic. It's called the Move Mic. It looks really nice. And what I think is very interesting is that Rode have these things and they're small and square. You'll have seen them on YouTube videos all over the place. They're the size of half the size of a pack of cards, I guess. And and they are smallish, but they're still quite big. And what Shure said in their press release is nobody wants a big, bulky microphone distracting from their next shot, which I thought was very much aimed at Rode and their big, bulky microphone. But it does look very smart. They've done a very clever job with the images. If you take a look at the image on the Podnews website that we posted earlier on in the week, the image of it being worn, most of the bulk of the microphone is hidden behind the jacket which is being worn. So all you can see is a tiny little mic. But actually, it's still relatively bulky. It's about half the size of the Rode one. It's just that you can't see it because of the way that it's built. But it's still pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to seeing them. I know that they were at the podcast show in London in year 1. So if they're at the podcast show in London in year 3, then I would quite like to go and see them. It'd be a quite nice thing.
Yeah, maybe they'll lend you one, James. You never know.
Maybe.
Now, moving on.
Google, they ended up firing 50 staff who were looking to unionize. They all work out of Austin in Texas. And they were in a meeting with Austin City Council asking for their help and their backing in working for unionization. And this happened.
There are less than 50 of us at YouTube Music. So to be supported by the city of Austin and also our allies in the labor community, give us the motivation to keep this fight going.
Not to interrupt, but they just laid us all off.
Oh.
Yeah, they just laid us all off.
Oh,
our
no,
jobs are ended today, effective immediately.
Wow.
I'm sorry your time has expired.
I mean, wow, what an incredible piece of audio.
Sorry, who was that? Sorry, your time's expired. I mean, that's a bit harsh, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the guy from Austin City Council who actually said, I'm sorry your time's expired, but we will be following this up with you later. Google on their side say that they weren't fired, they were contractors, the contract had ended. Didn't sound very much like a contract ending to me, and that they needed to negotiate with their employer, Cognizant, except the National Labour Relations Board has said twice that no, the workers are jointly employed by both Cognizant and Google, and the Alphabet Workers Union says that Google's action is illegal. But to do it in the middle of a meeting with a council like that is just astonishing. So, really bad, really bad stuff from Google. However they want to paint it, that does not come over well. So I remember when Google was one of those companies that I used to admire. But I think every single week I hear something else that I go, oh, really? Is that really a thing?
Didn't they have a motto called "Don't be evil"?
Yeah, they did, and then they got rid of it.
And then they're now evil.
Yes. So, it's just no good at all.
Now, one other company that has suffered with redundancies in 2023 was Pushkin Industries. This led to them having a new CEO, Gretta Cohn, and a new exec team. And I thought it'd be great, James, to catch up with Gretta and to find out what's happening at Pushkin Industries and what are their plans for 2024.
We are committed to making audio in any genre, any style that is high quality, that entertains, that educates, and that finds audience. And we are committed, as we say now, to good, smart, fun is sort of like our driving motto.
You've got a very extensive slate. I was very excited when you got Paul McCartney recently. Were you on board when that deal happened?
I came into Pushkin in the summer of 2022 when Pushkin acquired my production company, Transmitter Media. So the McCartney project was well underway, but my first role at Pushkin was as SVP of content. And so I dove right into that project. And, I have a background as a musician. Some of my favorite kind of content to consume, documentary, audio, film, series is music. So that was one of the first projects that I immediately sort of like took a shine to. And what was fascinating about that show is that the team had to work with archives that were recorded a number of years ago when Paul Muldoon was preparing to write the book with Paul McCartney, Life and Lyrics. And they were not intending to use any of that audio material in any shape or form. And so it was recorded in a very sort of offhand way. They're often eating lunch or eating almonds or drinking tea or eating something else. And so there were certainly challenges for the production team immediately coming into that project in terms of making this sort of beautiful, highly listenable, addictive series that we have today. But they did a wonderful job, the production team did. And it's been fantastic working with Paul McCartney's team and sort of collaborating with them on the project as well.
So looking at the extensive slate you have, how do Pushkin go about creating or deciding on what they're going to add to that slate? What gets dropped off at one end because everything has a shelf life, and what gets added? How does that process go?
Yeah. So I think we're very lucky in that we have a very strong network. As you and the audience well know, launching a show is one of the hardest things that we can do, launching a brand new show. And so when we're thinking about adding something new to our roster, we're really thinking about, is our audience going to enjoy? Are they going to learn from it? Is it going to maybe challenge them in interesting ways? And can we use our network to grow an audience? Because the last thing, and certainly Pushkin had its fair share of experiments in the last couple of years where we launch a show and it's really tough to find audience and get that footing. And ultimately, it's not going to be a long-term experience for Pushkin, for the hosts, because, there comes a point where if you're not driving audience, what are you doing? So we're very committed to using the full power of our network to build and launch new shows, new hosts, find audience.
Now, there has been a drive in the industry for celebrity-led podcasting, which is equally seemingly coming off, we thought, with Spotify removing the exclusives. And then on the back of that, we saw Smartless do a $100 million deal. We've seen not GoDaddy. I was going to say GoDaddy. It's not Call Her Daddy. It's basically started touting her podcast around the industry. We've seen others doing the same. Where does Pushkin stand on celebrity-driven podcasting?
Well, I think our celebrities are more of the sort of bookish folks who are like sort of thought leaders, thinkers, writers. So we're not necessarily capital C celebrity. We're looking for people who certainly, if we're launching something new, have an audience, right? Have that group that is going to be interested in what they're going to be doing in the medium. But it's usually because they've written a very powerful book, or they have a really different or interesting perspective, right? Like Michael Lewis, like Laurie Santos, who is a professor at Yale and has this whole happiness course that she developed there. So we are not so much working in the capital C celebrity stream.
No, I can see that. Now, looking at 2023, it was a pretty hard year. You weren't alone. I think the industry saw mass cutbacks. How did that affect Pushkin directly?
Yeah, 2023 was a really hard year, as you say, for the industry, for Pushkin. You know, we had layoffs. We had to look at our network and think about what is sustainable for us to do going forward. And so we had to make some hard choices to ensure that the network could remain and become strong again. You know, part of that was looking at shows that were not profitable, looking at shows that were not driving audience, and making some hard decisions there. And when you eliminate shows from the roster, unfortunately, it also means that like our staff necessarily needed to right size to accommodate that change. So in October, as we talked about, we had also not only some downsizing, but we had a major restructure of the company. So the leadership team changed. And I think what we are endeavoring to do with that change is really to focus on sustainability. I'm not sure that was a word that was a driving factor. I don't think that was necessarily the philosophy up until that point, and it wasn't for most. And so what we are now focused on is really thinking about how are we growing audience? How are we spending the right amount on making a show? How are we ensuring that we're able to recoup our costs and then actually have rev shares with our hosts so that everyone is happy? And that doesn't mean that, well, I was going to say that doesn't mean that we're not going to grow, but like we do want to grow. We want to grow in terms of our network. And then once we're able to sustainably grow our network, we can then think about growing our staff size again.
Does profitability as well as sustainability factor in as one of the main words for 24 for you?
I would say sustainability, but yes, also profitability. We are pointed in that direction.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, are you there now? But that tells me.
Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of where Pushkin is going, you've got another interesting part to the business, not just podcasting. You've got a very strong audiobook business. When did that form, and how do you separate between what is fundamentally a podcast and what is a chargeable audiobook? How do you make that decision?
So an audiobook takes it's a much different sort of art form than podcast in many ways. The time, certainly like a documentary podcast is something that may take 9 months, a year. Our audiobooks team is really coming from the publishing industry. Our VP of audiobooks, Gretta Cohn, has had a long and very decorated career in publishing, both print and audiobooks. And so she brings that very unique perspective. She understands that world deeply. And, as evidenced by our Audie that we received for Wild and Precious. And so she works very closely with audiobook authors to generate ideas, to write manuscripts. I mean, this is, when we're making a podcast, we have table reads, we have scripts, we have tape, and all of those good things that go into making a podcast. But an audiobook really starts with a manuscript, which is just a very different process. Oftentimes, the folks who are coming in to be the narrator and voice of these audiobooks have a very specific POV, and maybe it wouldn't be appropriate for a podcast. We are extremely dedicated to making audiobooks that do something different than your typical audiobook fare. Early in my career, I actually was a director and engineer at Recorded Books while I was doing, I was freelancing as a podcast producer, and I was a director at at that audiobooks company. And you go into the room, you press record. The most that I had in front of me was a pronouncer list so that I would correct an author when they were mispronouncing something. Our audiobooks are just like leaps beyond, in the sense that they are truly crafted in a beautiful, intentional way.
So in terms of then where you're taking the business, are you going to go into any other genres like video? We've seen YouTube become, RSS enabled, allegedly. Do you see taking any of your podcasts into a visual medium?
I think we're certainly interested in experimenting with video and with expanding into the visual realm. We are an audio first company. And so that means that we don't necessarily have the staff who are experts in that at the moment. And I think like video and audio are very distinct mediums. And so when thinking about working in visual and in video, we want to be certain that we are doing it in a way that serves the viewer, right? We don't want to just put something out that's going to be like an afterthought. We have been experimenting. Some of our shows do capture some amount of video. I think in our new series for revisionist history developmental, there are a couple of little clips that we're collecting on video, and they're wonderful to see. There is an element that's added when you see someone telling the story visually. That's just fantastic. But some of our shows that I think could really lend themselves to video are a show like Broken Record, right? Like this morning, I was listening to the interview that Justin Richmond has done with PJ Harvey and John Parrish. Huge fan. Would I like to be able to watch that interview and see PJ Harvey and with them in that way? Absolutely, yes. So it's something that we are definitely exploring and is on our radar. Are we there yet? Not quite.
One of the other areas that a lot of production companies are looking at are international foreign language translations.
Yeah.
Taking the existing core element and then using it. Now, iHeartMedia and Wondery are looking at using AI voice-enabled voice translations. Other companies don't believe that's a good model, that, A, the technology is maybe not there, but B, they feel that you can't get that local nuance unless you've got an actual language spoken person. Where does Pushkin sit? Are you looking to technology to internationalize what you do, or are you looking for native speakers and then re-record?
We're exploring.
Okay.
We currently are. Yeah, we are working on a Spanish translation of the Happiness Lab. That is, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm fairly certain that is using native speakers who are essentially like performing the role of the voices, human narrator, native speaker with Univision. And that project is underway, super interesting. Are we looking at the potential for AI? Certainly we are. I mean, I think we would not be doing our due diligence if we weren't trying to understand how it might work. I think that there is a lot of opportunity to bring some of our most popular shows to audiences in their language. So we are on that train. We are exploring it from all directions. Yeah.
Cool. Apple Podcasts this week launched iOS 17.4 with transcriptions. Is this something that Pushkin's going to be, focusing on adding transcriptions to all of their podcasts?
Oh, yeah. When I was at HotPod last week, yes. What is time? I ran into Jake Shapiro from Apple in the hallway, and he showed me one of our shows, Cautionary Tales, and we looked at the transcript together, and I think it's excellent. I think it's great. I think accessibility is really important. Also, simply, if you are a listener who wants to return to an episode that you had heard last year, and you're looking because you wanted to maybe find out what did PJ Harvey say about Captain Beefheart, right? Like you can then, search in the transcript. I think it's excellent. I'm really glad it's here. And I think we will be really continuing to ensure that we have transcripts for across our shows.
Now, Pushkin has got something called Pushkin Plus, so I think that's your subscription-based model. And obviously, you've got an advertising-driven model. Are you looking at any other forms of monetization, or are they the only two, advertising or, subscription-based?
Well, our audiobooks, right? So our audiobooks is, I would say, like the third leg of the stool. We've got our, ads-based, our podcasts, and our ads-based monetization, as you say, our subscription service, Pushkin Plus, and then, audiobooks. It becomes a really fantastic way that we can actually connect directly with listeners. Oh, did you freeze? Oh, there you are. So audiobooks are a great way for us to be working on content that has its own type of monetization, that is free from the ads, the ups and downs of the ads market. And that is an area where we're going to be focused on growth for sure.
Cool. Last question. Looking back on 2024, what would success look like for you?
We'd love to launch a few shows that make an impact on audience. We have a number of audiobooks that we're releasing this year. We'd love to see them also drive audience. Coming out this spring is The Art of Small Talk, which I think is going to be a fantastic and funny and informative book. And then, of course, sustainability and profitability. And that is just something that we are... and on top of that, because I actually haven't talked yet about our wonderful staff at Pushkin, we're really focused on a healthy, happy workplace where people can show up every day, feel proud of the work they're doing, enjoy working with their colleagues, feel supported, have the resources that they need. I think particularly coming out of what last year was, that's a huge priority for me. And so at the end of 2024, if I can say that I have a happy, healthy staff and group and community and group of producers, marketers, operations folks, that would be a huge success.
Gretta, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your new role.
Thank you for having me.
And all the success for 2024.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Gretta Cohn from Pushkin Industries. Really interesting that. Did you end up talking, obviously she's been working on audiobooks and micropayments and all of that kind of stuff. Did you end up talking much about Podcasting 2.0 with her?
I did, and we did it after the interview. I didn't feel it was fair to put her in a position of having to publicly talk about it as an official spokesperson for Pushkin. And sadly, what I would say, and it's quite common, I think, with most of the interviews that I do with people in, let's say, senior leadership positions, they're not aware of Podcasting 2.0. They're not aware of micropayments. She certainly was not aware that there was a new medium equals audiobooks, and I demoed that for her. She is interested in it, and she wants to understand more about it as a long-term thing. But clearly, in her head, audiobooks are a paid-for item and podcasts are an advertising-supported free item, and she doesn't want to have the two meet. So when I was trying to explain that there are ways to set a default value for the audiobook so that, you don't have to have V for V where it's 0, she was interested, but, interested as in curious, but not interested enough to actually probably implement anything anytime soon.
Yes. No, and I think, the podcasting2.org website is a start, but actually, I think one of the frustrating things I think for me was in Dallas, in Texas, when Adam Curry was there, the inventor of the podcast. And he was there with Dave Jones talking about Podcasting 2.0. Now it might have been the time that he was, scheduled. It might have been the room that he was scheduled in, but he ended up having, I would guess that the room, it was probably a third full, and I'm probably being a little bit, complimentary there. It was disappointing, and I don't know what we can do to make people more interested in it. it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Well, if Nielsen did a survey of CEOs of all the big production companies, have they heard of Podcasting 2.0 and are they planning to support it? I suspect the answer is no and no. As sadly, I still think, as much as I love it and I'm 100% supporter of it, I'm building an app that relies on it. So, money where mouth is. I still think we talk in a bubble, and I still think we talk to ourselves and we don't focus on outbound marketing. And if, Adam will say, well, if people mention it at the end of their show or during their show, and I'll go, yeah, the half dozen shows that use it, great. That's not going to cause a richter in anyone's, boardroom. So I don't know what the answer is. I do think, as I said earlier, though, what Oscar's hinted at, and I don't know if Fountain are going to implement this, but what Primal have done, which fundamentally allows you to have one-click payment to get your sats, I think is going to be potentially a game changer, because it goes back to your original point, James, which is the user at the end of the day doesn't need to know that sats is a Bitcoin micro payment system. They just need to know it's funny tokens that I use on this app.
Well, yes, exactly. So, yeah, Well, it's one of those things that we should sort of continue banging the drum at. That said, of course, ads are still earning money. iHeartMedia releasing its Q4 financials, podcast revenue up 17% for the quarter, up 14% for the whole of 2023. And the company claims growing demand for podcast advertising, which is probably a good thing.
And also a good thing, Serial, which some say was the podcast that led to this second coming of podcasting. It's 10 years since Serial started, and this month it's coming back for the 4th season. It's out on March the 28th on the New York Times audio app and everywhere podcasts are, it says here. So, yeah. So, again, I've not listened to Serial. Should I?
What? You've not listened to the original Serial?
No. Wow. Hey, I don't read books unless it's technical, so why would I want to go and listen to a podcast about some fictional story? It doesn't interest me.
It isn't a fictional story; it's a real story. But
okay,
yeah,
still,
yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting because I think that Serial, if Serial, Serial was one of those big shows that, you were having conversations around the water cooler about, where are you in Serial and how have you caught up and everything else. And it was very interesting. And I wonder whether Serial would work now. And I'm pretty convinced it won't. From a point of view of would it be as big as that? But yes, it's back. With a 4th season, it's a story about Guantanamo through the personal stories of those on the ground who know things the rest of us don't. Is all that it says. I will be listening, doubtless I will be listening to a few of them and going, yeah, but it's not as good as the original, and moving on. But still, there we go.
I might actually listen to that because I am so amazed that people can get away with having Guantanamo Bay. But anyway.
The tech stuff on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Podnews newsletter. Here's where we do all of the tech talk, and here's where Sam talks technology. Sam, what have you got for us?
Well, a couple of interesting ones. New dynamic feed drop technology has been launched by Podroll. The tool adds promotional episodes directly into podcasts as the second most recent episode. What's it doing, James?
This is really cool, I think, in that they have access to more than 30 different podcast networks. They change the RSS feeds dynamically for these podcasts to chuck in a promotional episode. So it's like a feed drop, but it's a feed drop at scale. I think it's quite a clever idea, and also quite a clever idea sticking a trailer in as the second most recent episode in your RSS feed. You might find that a daily podcast is currently doing that for this very show. I thought that was a really clever plan. So that's Podroll, which is worth a peek at. Do a search in the Podnews website for that. Spreaker is now supporting Podping, which is good news. Podping, of course, being the way that you communicate to podcast directories that you've published a new episode. Loads of people support it already. Buzzsprout, Blueberry, Transistor, RSS.com, Captivate, Podnews, and the addition of Spreaker probably at least doubles the amount of shows which are being mentioned by Podping, given that Spreaker is a very large, has a free tier and everything else. So, that's pretty good news, I think.
I'd love to know who isn't supporting Podping anymore.
Oh, who isn't supporting? I mean, Libsyn.
Oh, Libsyn don't support anything. I mean,
yeah, because it was invented since 2008. So obviously they're not supporting it. I don't believe there are a few others. I'm not sure that Omni Studio is supporting it. I'm not entirely confident about that. I do know that Libsyn certainly doesn't support it, and of course, people like the BBC, people like NPR, they don't appear to support Podping either. And I think actually this is where we should be. I mean, the BBC's internal RSS thing, and the ABC's as well, is so old-fashioned. It doesn't deal with trailers. You can't very easily change, descriptions and everything else. I mean, that's really where the low-hanging fruit is, because there are a lot of shows that use that too. So, yeah.
Now, Wondercraft, who we had on a few weeks ago, the Canva for audio, won Product of the Day at Product Hunt. So they're really pushing their marketing out now as well.
Yes. Descripts releasing version 84. They've got a new AI action. It's called Find All Highlights. So basically lets you find any highlights that it thinks are worth sharing, which is good. And
our friends at RSS.com have released a new embeddable player, and they've also released a new affiliate program with Rewardful. I was catching up with Alberto over email, so that's really good. Excitingly as well, they're planning on releasing support for the pod roll in April, possibly. And also, we talked about how RSS.com were the first company to do a lit live conference over in Mexico, the one that you were at, James.
Yeah.
Well, they're now going to productize that. So their lit version 1 is hopefully also going to come out in April. And hopefully when both those come out, we'll have either Alberto, or maybe we could get Ben to speak on a microphone and get him to tell us more about it. But yes, we'll hear what they have to say in April.
Yes. No, absolutely. I'm sure Ben will speak on a microphone. He's spoken on a microphone for me in the past for the Podcast Business Journal, so I'm sure he'll do that for us as well.
Boostergram Corner on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, it's our favourite time of the week. It's Boostergram Corner. And yes, we've got some lovely boosts in here. Just as a reminder, Sam and I share everything from this podcast ourselves. It's actually nothing to do with the Pod News Daily other than it's a trademark license. So there's a thing. So please hit that boost button if you can. We've got a row of ducks from Nathan Gathright.
Yes, he said, when Sam said, "What's that purple logo?" which is last week, looking at a logo in one of the boostergrams, I think he might have been referring to the generic boostergram icon, which is displayed in Helipad as a fallback when no app logo is available. I'm jealous that I didn't think of a rocket like the one in True Fans. Here's the original thread. Yes, I thought, and I can say I didn't come up with the idea of a rocket either. I can't remember who did, but I copied their idea. So yes, but we do use a rocket for boosts in True Fans.
Indeed, which is a good thing. Gene Bean, another row of ducks, 2222 sats. Hope you feel better soon, Sam. Do you feel better? You had COVID last week.
It's hard to tell. Maybe when my rants are stopped, maybe that's when I'm better again. I don't know.
Yes, maybe it's that. Gene Bean also says, I'm not sad at all to have influenced James's use of Home Assistant. So this week I have managed to integrate our electricity bill in, and I've managed to do a couple of other things with Home Assistant as well. Look what you started. So thank you for that. 1,000 sats from Andrew Grummett. Amen, brother Sam.
Yes, exactly. I think it's one of my rants. I think Andrew's agreeing with me, and I was thinking before the show we should actually get Andrew on at some point. And so,
we should do. Yes. We should do. He's he was the person who invented the first podcast app that I ever used, iPodder. or Juice Podder. Yeah, he goes back like years and years and years. We should definitely do that. He's also sent another 1,000 sats to the Podnews Daily. This is where I read out the boosts from the Podnews Daily as well. Love the humour. And I went back and looked at that particular episode, Podcasting's Rural Opportunity. I could find no humour in it. So who knows? Maybe it was something I edited out afterwards. But anyway, Andrew, thank you so much for that.
And finally, a row of ducks as well from our friend Kyron at the Mere Mortals. Thank you. That's all he said. Thank you. And thank you as well. I don't know what he's thanking us for, but thank you as well. Actually, I would say thank you to Kyron because he's started series 4 of the Value for Value podcast. So I'm looking forward to that series.
Well, yes, indeed. So what's been happening for you this week, Sam?
Well, still recovering. I feel like I've got arthritis in every joint still, but hey, that's just what I think everyone has when they get COVID. So this is my first time, so I'm not going to milk it for sympathy. We're working on 3 new big features for True Fans. So we are going to implement offline support, probably early next week. That'll be available. So you will be able to take all of your podcasts offline and also stream sats while offline. So that's going to be working. That was one of our issues about how do we do streaming sats and record that while the user's offline, but we've worked that out. I mentioned that we're going to integrate Apple Pay and Google Pay, so you can just simply top up your wallet straight from one click using Apple Pay or Google Pay. So that I think will be hopefully a game changer in terms of people being able to say, yeah, I just want to use $10 or I want to use £5 or whatever it may be. And then they can just quickly just double click and that's straight into their wallet. So that's something I think will be quite cool.
No, indeed. That all sounds excellent. Mark Asquith has a new podcast, doesn't he?
He does. Mark Asquith's podcast with Danny Brown is going to be called In and Around Podcasting. Mark's been putting out some very funny trailers for it. So if you haven't heard the trailers, check them out. I think it's the end of his podcast accelerator for now. And this is a new one that him and Danny are going to do. And just a quick thank you to Danny Brown for sending over a whole load of Rodecaster Pro 2 configuration settings that I've used. So thanks, Danny, for those as well.
Indeed. No, absolutely. The Rode Procaster is it's a bit of a complicated beast, isn't it? It's got lots of buttons and things.
The problem is, if you get it wrong, you can sound like Daffy Duck very quickly. It's, the noise gates can be all set in the wrong place, and then suddenly your big boost and your oral boost or whatever it's called can be all wrong. So having somebody who knows exactly what they're doing and what right settings to choose and use was a godsend. So thank you, Danny, for those.
Yeah, no, indeed.
Now, James, what's been happening for you?
I've been planning some of the presentations that I'm giving over the next few weeks or so. I think the first one that I have to do, weirdly, is the last one that I'm doing. Because the first one that I have to do, I actually have to get my speech for Evolutions by Podcast Movement over to them relatively quickly. So I've got to go through the report card and take a peek through there. One of the interesting things I think from that is we will actually get some form of idea of how many people know about Podcasting 2.0 and how many people don't, because of the amount of answers that we get for some of those questions. So I'll go diving into that a little bit more after our conversation today. But also, we will have a special guest, or I will have a special guest for that very keynote that nobody knows about, not even the folks at Podcast Movement. Probably not going to mention it to them either. So so there we go. But anyway, but that person has sent a very excellent video, and that's going to be part of it. So I'm delighted about that too. Yes, and I'm just sort of playing around with the other pieces I'm doing are all on new interesting tools from podcasting that radio stations should be using, and I've discovered it's just been fun playing around with some of these new AI tools and some of the new tools that are capable of doing weird and wonderful things, and working out which I can reliably show off in a live environment, which will be entertaining. Not quite so sure about that.
Yes.
But still.
Before you go, also, we will be hosting a small drinks in LA. James is like, I haven't a clue. What are we doing here, Sam? Yes. So whether
I know, I'm saying I'm opening my calendar app now.
So
sticking it in. When are they, Sam?
It's at the Broken Shaker. It's a rooftop bar, and James and I will work out the exact date after this show. So in next week's show we will reveal it. But the location will be the Broken Shaker. So we'll be sending out some invites to people very shortly.
Broken Shaker.
Yeah, it's a rooftop bar. Look it up. Right around the corner from the Marriott. Very nice. And
not the Broken Shaker in Canberra, though.
No, not that I'm aware of. No, that would be far too far.
It's a portable bar, the one in Canberra.
So yes,
but still.
So we'll be going there.
No, it looks good.
Yes,
it looks good. Yes.
Bring your budgie smugglers. It has a pool at the top if you want as well, James.
Yes, there will be no chance of that.
And also, I'm planning the London drink ups as well very shortly. So again, Gretta Cohn will be coming over to London, she said, and she's already invited from Pushkin Industries. So yeah, I'm very excited for the London one as well.
Excellent. Well, yes, I'm looking forward to. So it's not too far. It's a quick couple of walks away. It's a couple of blocks. Is that what they say in America? A couple of blocks away. It's a James Beard Award finalist. I'm called James. I have a beard.
So there you go. It's all fitting into place, the plan.
It's all fitting into place. Yes. Well, I'm looking forward to finding out what you've actually managed to book, because that's always the important thing, isn't it? And that's it for this week. Thank you to Alban Brooke, and thank you to Gretta Cohn. You can also listen to the Pod News Daily and subscribe to the Pod News newsletter for more of these stories and more too.
You can give feedback to James and I by sending this show a boostergram. If your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new app from podcasting2.org/apps.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Podnews Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.